Chapter 23 is basically the time period between the world wars. So in 1914, World War I began. During this war, over 10 million were killed and 20 million people were wounded. And so this pretty much equals the loss of almost an entire generation during this time period. And it resulted in a political and cultural change forever. New governments assumed power. They began to dictate economy, censor public expression, and control information to manipulate the way people thought. Artist creations were usually kind of hopes for a better world, and so it was pretty bleak times during this time period in Europe. A lot of artists were either denouncing their present conditions or trying to create utopian ideals, these new utopian visions of the life they could have. And so a lot of artists for this time period started to use art as a tool for social betterment and to spread modernist innovations to non-European populations. So up until this chapter, all we've pretty much looked at is Europe. And we're still going to be in Europe as we look at Dada, Surrealism, and then have a little update on what's going on in Cubism. But we're also going to jump around a little bit and go to Latin America, America, and look at American artists and African American artists. And so there's a lot going on during this time period, a lot of changes. We have Dada. And Dada is basically a protest to the horrors of World War I. Dada is their rally cry. This is both a political and artistic movement. And they basically found this by inserting a knife into a dictionary, and this two-syllable word was what the knife landed on. And so they believed that it was suited for expressing their rebellious attitude in this very incohesive style. So that kind of gives you an idea of what this group was like. They believed that Europe had kind of lost its way. Its culture had lost its way because it created this insane war with all of this destruction like they'd never seen before. And so they believed that basically all the morals, everything that they had known up until World War I must be wrong, because they believed that these traditional moral values caused World War I and caused all this horror. So they basically rejected most moral, social, political, and aesthetic values. They believed that it was pointless to find meaning and order in a world in which these values had resulted in chaos and destruction. So their artwork is based a lot on play and spontaneity. Based a lot about chance, as you saw in how they found their name, and it's pretty irrational. As you see here in this piece here by Duchamp, L-H-O-O-Q, he was probably one of the most radical of the Dadaists. This painting here is a rebellion against the standards of beauty, and so he bought a reproduction of the Mona Lisa, this very revered and very well-known painting from art history, and added a mustache and a beard to her face. He also added L-H-O-O-Q at the bottom, which is basically translates as a vulgar French pun, something like she is hot tail. And so he's kind of changing slightly this one of the world's most revered paintings, and kind of questioning this idea of beauty. And so the Dadaists basically question everything. They also take these mass-produced objects and offer them up as artwork, and they're known as ready-made. And so we see these two by Duchamp, in advance of the broken arm, which is a snow shovel, and the fountain, which is a urinal. And so here he's completely questioning what is art and who gets to say what art is. It's kind of a slap in the face on these traditional standards of beauty and art. Here's another ready-made by Man Ray. He basically takes this everyday objects and adds tacks to it and creates it into this pretty useless and dangerous object. Dada has actually expanded the Cubist idea of collage. And so with what they would call photo montage, and they would actually take parts of photographs and combine them in a thought-provoking manner. And so here we see a piece by Hannah Hawk on the left, The Millionaire, or High Finance. And this is an industrial age man, and he stands as a fractured giant among the things he has produced. And so a lot of the Dadaists were questioning the Industrial Revolution and questioning the making of these huge destructive devices that we were able to create because of the advances of the Industrial Revolution. And so a little fact is Hannah Hawk was actually attacked for not being original because she combined already existed photographs for creating this photo montage. And so she was attacked for not being original because she was using other people's artwork. But actually, this is the first time anyone had ever done that and shown it as their own. And so that was highly influential and very original for that time period. No one had done this before, and people do it all the time now. And so I just thought that was interesting about how a lot of times we don't see what is new and innovative until later on in a movement. And there's another one of her collages to the right of this slide also. I would also encourage you to watch the YouTube video on this slide. It is a video created in the Dada style, but also is about Dada and what Dada is. So it's pretty interesting. Dada's often declared art was dead and believed it was useless to create beauty in a world that was destroying itself. They were trying to create an anti-aesthetic, but actually created its own aesthetic. And so it's very, as you'll see from the video, you can kind of tell when something's a Dada style. It's kind of this own style within itself that they ended up creating with the very act of trying not to create a style. From Dada, we see the development of Surrealism. These Surrealist artists began about 1924, and they wanted to kind of protect the direction of European culture, much like Dadaists, but a little bit more specific. They believed the emphasis on science, rationality, and progress of the Enlightenment was impeding on the consciousness of the Europeans. And so this was kind of throwing consciousness off balance. And so they wanted to bring back this importance of the unconscious mind, dreams, fantasies, and hallucinations. They drew on this new psychology of Sigmund Freud and also the irrationality of the Dadaist. Dadaist Max Ernst, and this is one of his pieces here, he was a strong Dadaist and actually converted to Surrealism after he went and fought in the war and started suffering from nightmares. And so he wanted to recreate his nightmares, but a little bit more fantasy involved in them. And so he was influenced by Dadaists, and so he did something that I'm sure we've all done, where you lay a piece of paper down on concrete or something textured and scribble a pencil or crayon on it, and you get this texture when you pull the paper up. And so that's what he did. He started off doing that and did not have any clue what the image was going to look like when he was done. And so when he got finished creating his texture and started looking at the image, he started seeing these silhouettes of these monsters that he would see in his nightmares. And so he turned these textures into the monsters. And so you can see this influence of the Dadaist kind of spontaneity and play, but then you see the influence of the Surrealism having to deal with these dreams and nightmares. Salvador Dali is probably one of the most well-known Surrealist painters. He dealt more directly with his nightmares as just basically recreating them in this very highly illusionistic way, but he uses these very academic techniques. So he's pretty much following the rules of art, but he's kind of changing it up a little bit and making it a little nightmarish. His paintings are known for this dreamlike quality. He a lot of times would refer to this piece, The Persistence of Memory, as a self-portrait, that he would believe this dream or nightmare that he was having was more descriptive of him than actually a portrait of his face. And so in this painting, the mechanical time wilts in a landscape of infinite space, and this is perceived to be the last remnant of a vanishing humanity. And so he gives this sense of deep space and this very representational technique, this near photographic, but it's very dreamlike at the same time. And I don't know how you dream, but that's how my dreams feel a lot of times. They're almost super real, and so that they seem unreal. And I think that's what he's trying to depict here. And so Dali is a very well-known Surrealist painter, and you've probably seen this work before or details of this work before. Miro was a Surrealist painter and was also influenced by Dadaist. He was interested in more playing with the viewer's imagination and a lot of emphasis on color and design rather than storytelling, as we've seen with a couple of these artists. He started using automatism, which is a drawing created by cultivating a chance accident. And so basically he would roll out his canvas and he would just start scribbling, and then when he was done he'd step back and look at it and see what emerged to him after he was done scribbling. So it was a lot like Max Ernst's painting of the monsters. And so it was a little bit more happenstance, but why this is Surrealist is because it's based on the unconscious mind and this imagination that we have and these thoughts that we have that we might not even be connected to or know what's going on with them. René Magritte was also a Surrealist painter, and he did a lot of teasing humor in his artwork. And so here we see the portrait. It's this very ordinary kind of placed meal in front of you, but then you look at the plate and you realize there's an eyeball staring back at you in the ham bone. And so this is also a Surrealist work. So as you can see, Surrealism isn't necessarily a distinct way of painting or distinct style like Impressionism. It's more about the mindset and the approach, where dreams and imagination and unconscious mind are very important, and so that's what the subject matter is of the Surrealist style. Cubism changed pretty drastically during this time period, and so this idea of being a representation and an abstraction kind of gets pushed to the extreme, and the figure and the groundwork actually gets pushed to the extreme also, so it's really hard to tell the difference. And so everything's being pushed towards more abstraction, and as we see here in this painting of the airplane flying, where it's broken down completely into abstracted shapes and colors of an airplane. And so it was believed that shapes and colors always communicate. And so we're, in Cubism, we're kind of moving more away from a subject matter and more about shapes and colors. Much like this piece by Mondrian. He wanted to work to free painting from depiction of real objects and the expression of personal feeling. And so non-representational art. And he basically believed that the universal elements were straight lines, the three primary colors, and rectangular shapes. And so this is what he'd used to create all of his paintings. And you've probably seen this painting or something like this painting, a different variation of it before. But he actually believed that these paintings were parallel to nature. It was much like nature. He saw nature as being very rational and orderly. And so that's a bit maybe opposite of what some of us think of when we're thinking of things of tornadoes and death. Maybe it doesn't seem very orderly, but he saw that as very orderly. And so he has pushed Cubism to complete abstraction and this very orderly and tight geometric shapes and lines. So let's see what's going on in other parts of the world. We can jump down from Europe down to Latin America. And modern art began to influence Latin America beginning about the 1920s. And artists in Latin America were very interdisciplinary. They were not only artists, but they were usually poets and composers also. And so they wanted to know how to relate to European culture, because this is kind of the hub of modern art. But they also wanted to have their own self-expression. And so this is a great example of that. We can see here that this artist studied Cubism and abstract sculpture, but it still contains this kind of tropical influence of their surroundings, what they would see, such as the cactus and the bright sun. These would not be things you would see in Europe. Frida Kahlo was a very famous painter during this time period. She was labeled as a surrealist, but she never really took that label herself. She worked very closely as a folk artist, more towards that style. But you could see here how this painting could have a surrealist qualities, can be very dreamlike. And so this is a portrait of herself, and it's two of herself, and it's basically her split personality between being European and Mexican. So she was part of both of those heritages. And so it's an allusion to Aztec human sacrifice and to many personal surgeries she had had in her life. Up in North America, in the 1930s, America is going through the Great Depression. And so people are searching for both a national and personal identity. And the focus on subject matter becomes much more local and much more Americanized during this time period. But the public is pretty indifferent about American artists. You can imagine if you're going through a depression and you can't put food on your table, you're not really concerned about supporting an artist. And so this is kind of a hard time in America for artists also. And so here we see Hopper's Nighthawks, and he's trying to depict the loneliness of American life during this time period. He's known for his carefully organized compositions controlled by the use of light and shadows. So they're very clear and organized, most of his compositions. We have Grant Wood. Many of you may have seen this before. It's a pretty popular painting, American Gothic. And so Grant Wood actually moved to Paris and thought he was going to be an Impressionist painter, but he was very unsuccessful at this. And so he came back home to the Midwest, and he began to memorialize the unique character of the land and people and kind of the way of life of the Midwestern American. And so he's known for this very crisp realism that you see here. He's inspired by Northern Renaissance painters Van Eyck and Dürer, and also American folk painting, and also photographs of the late 1800s where people had to stand for a very long time waiting for the film to expose, and so they were very, not very pleasant looking because you can't stand there and smile for too long. And so those are some influences of his work in this painting. And so this is actually a local farmer's farmhouse. The figures are actually the artist's sister and his dentist. And so it's just two people he found to be in this painting. He uses very restrained color. He has simplified round masses that kind of echo through the shapes of the trees and the people, their heads and kind of their shoulders are kind of these round masses. We have a lot of detail, high detail. We have these dominant parallel lines and paired elements such as the pitchfork lines are repeated in the overalls and the shirt and in the window. And these pitchfork tines actually symbolize firm traditional stance and virtue. And so this painting actually becomes a national icon during the Depression. We have Thomas Hart Benton, and he was actually the son of a Missouri state senator, And he really wanted to create an American style, a distinct American style. But as you see here, he was greatly influenced by Michelangelo and Cubism, how everything's stacked on top of each other and really in front of the picture plane. And so he didn't really quite do that. We can see the European influences, but he's working on it. What he wants to do is he wants to kind of depict the history of ordinary people on the land. And he believed that this history was in contrast to the conventional history that was taught to him in school. And so he believed our history books and what our teachers were telling us weren't necessarily true. And so this is one of a series, American Historical Epic. This is Palisades. And this is where European colonizers are dividing up the land while the Native Americans are sharing their knowledge of growing corn needed for survival. And so he believed that this is a much more honest depiction of history than what he was learning in school. African American artists during this time period really want to try to reconnect to their roots in ancestral arts of Africa. And so they did not paint academic styles, but they wanted to express themselves through recognizable African-based styles. And there was a movement known as the Harlem Renaissance, and this was basically a traveling exhibit provided by the Harmon Foundation that supported African American artists during this time period. And so here we see a piece by Johnson, Forever Free. And he's expressing his views of black identity. And so we have this motherly woman figure that's this very kind of Americanized figure. And it shelters two figures below her, two children. But these are done in more of a traditional African style, and it has African characteristics to the art. And so the title is from the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 that was supposed to end slavery, Forever Free. And so it's just kind of this reconnection to their African roots and expressing how they live as an African American. Another African American artist during this time is Motley Jr., and this is his piece Barbecue. His mission in art was he wanted to express this realist view of African American culture. And so he was known for calling himself frankly honest. So such as this painting here, we have gamblers and drinking alcohol, even though this was during the Prohibition. And so this is what was really happening in his life, and so that's what he painted, even though it was illegal. He specialized in kind of depicting this urban experience, and one of the things he was really known for was painting how artificial light influences a room. And so if you're under one of those bulbs in a school, it's this very weird light that it gives off compared to bulbs other places. And so that's what he was known for, kind of capturing how artificial light would change a setting inside as opposed to natural light outside.